My name is Eitan Chatayat, and welcome to I'm That podcast, where I get to talk to some pretty incredible people. Some are friends and colleagues, some are clients, and some are people I haven't even met yet. On I'm That, we'll hear from them about who they are, what they do and why, stuff they love or hate, mistakes they've made, victories they've had. They're all known for something, but by the time we're through, the hope is they'll have revealed some things we didn't know about them. Our talk may be deep, profound, funny, who knows really. One thing for sure, it'll be interesting and honest. So if you're up for that, thank you for joining me on I'm That, and here we go. Shabbos Kestenbaum is a religious American Jewish activist. Until not so long ago, he was a Harvard Divinity School student, and that's evolved since October to where he's now suing Harvard University in a landmark case that alleges Harvard failed to protect Jewish students from antisemitism. He's only 25. While at Harvard, he founded and was president of the Harvard Divinity School Jewish Student Association and an active member of both Harvard Chabad and Harvard Hillel. He didn't just become a campus leader and a Jewish activist on October 8th. Like many of us, Shabbos is on the front lines of the fight for Israel right now, especially for Jewish students, but really all Jewish Americans with one of the world's most prestigious universities. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to have him today on I'm That. Hey, Shabbos.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. So where am I finding you right now?
Well, I'm very happy to say that even though I'm basically in a different city every day, I'm finally home for Sukkot. This is my first time home for the holidays in a very, very long time.
Wow. So why have you been bouncing around everywhere? What are you doing?
I'm very privileged and honored and fortunate that we are building a coalition of young American Jews who are fighting back, standing up for their civil rights on campuses. And different cities want to hear about our story and what we're doing. And it's an exhausting time, but nonetheless, I cannot think of a better way of spending my time. So that's primarily what I'm doing each day.
Well, I know what you're doing. I think a lot of Jewish people out there know what you're doing, but this podcast is primarily, it's more Fortune 500 kind of like audience. And instead of me asking you all sorts of questions, I think what would be amazing is if you just summarize who you are and what you've been doing a little bit before October 7th and in the past year, and talk about exactly what you're doing these days, which you just kind of like gave us a glimpse into. And then what I'd really love to do is I'd love to get to know you. Like, I'd love to kind of like find out what it is about you, what makes you tick with this particular agenda that you have. So why don't we just start from the beginning? But like it's an opportunity for you to introduce yourself instead of me asking you all sorts of questions at the beginning. Why don't you just like, no one knows who you are. Let's pretend no one knows who you are. What's the deal, man? What are you doing?
What's the deal? So I guess in a nutshell, I'm a first generation American. My parents came here about 30 years ago. My dad started his own business, which he leads to this day. He sells rare Jewish books and manuscripts. He has an auction house. So I grew up in a house where every single wall was covered in 18th and 17th century Jewish books and manuscripts, which is where I got my passion for Jewish culture, Jewish history. And I'm an Orthodox Jew. And I never really saw the two, my American identity and my Jewish identity, as a contradiction. They were very much complementary. And I went to Jewish school my whole life. After high school, I went to Israel for 2.5 years. I studied in yeshiva in the old city of Jerusalem. So literally 2 minutes away from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Western Wall, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I decided, for whatever reason, that I wanted to explore religion from a totally different perspective, namely a secular, pluralistic, non-sectarian institution, and that would be Harvard. Harvard has a school of religion, and I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to explore religion from that perspective because I wanted to gain from other people while also trying to add my own unique voice as well. And I remember when I was applying, the very, very few Jews and really Orthodox Jews who had gone before told me not to do it because there was this anti-Israel, borderline anti-Semitic undercurrent. And I took the attitude, I was certainly naive at the time, but I took the attitude of, I'm going to change it. And if it's a challenge, that's fine with me because I enjoy speaking truth to power, so to say. Before October 7th, I was involved with what I guess is called spiritual activism. So I have an arrest record in Poland. I was banned from China. I spoke at rallies for Jews who were victims of like clergy abuse. So I was very into spiritual activism. And when I got to Harvard, I realized quite quickly that this undercurrent was much more pervasive and systemic than I was led to believe. And there was certainly anti-Semitism at Harvard pre-October 7th. In fact, I wrote an article for Aish.com, a Jewish publication called Anti-Semitism at Harvard, and I had written it in October of 2022. And I don't think anyone really read the article, but it was certainly there. And it's a shame it took the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust for the Jewish community and then certainly the national electorate to take this issue seriously. But it was there.
Let me ask you a quick question before you continue. And I'm going to be careful not to digress and to spend 20 minutes talking about this. But like you say that you quickly found that there was anti-Semitism in Harvard. Can you just tell people who might not understand, because the word anti-Semitism is being used a lot, but what does that mean when you say there was anti-Semitism at Harvard? And then let's continue.
I would say at its most basic level, it's the double standard and the different way of treating Jewish students than you would any other student. So for me, the most obvious example was Harvard's invitation and acceptance of anti-Semitism on campus when they would not stand for that type of discrimination with other groups. So Harvard was ranked 248th out of 248 universities by the Foundation of Individual Rights and Expressions, FIRE, as it pertains to free speech, as it pertains to their protections of the First Amendment. I mean, this is an institution that routinely rescinds the invitations of controversial speakers, that accepted about a dozen students for posting sexist memes in a private WhatsApp group. I mean, this is not an institution that traditionally has cared about intellectual discourse and academic rigor. And then when Mohammed al-Kurd, who's a notorious anti-Semite, he's appeared on the ADL's top 10 anti-Semites. He believes Jews eat the organs of Palestinians. He said that we need to, quote, normalize massacres, that all Zionists must perish. When he was invited to come to campus, we went to the university and said, well, why don't you just treat him the same way you treat all other controversial speakers? Rightly or wrongly, you don't have an environment of free speech. And they kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, what do you want us to do about it? I mean, that's a shocking double standard. That's blatantly discriminatory. And as we'll prove in court, we have a lawsuit that's illegal. And that was my first month of being a student at Harvard University. Never mind the fact that there were swastikas being drawn on campus. The boycott, divestment, and sanction BDS movement was incredibly popular. So there was pervasive and systemic anti-Semitism.
So it's interesting because a lot of non-Jewish people see anti-Semitism as swastikas, or blatant Jew hatred or intolerance for the Jews. But I think it's very important, and the reason why I asked you the question is that you can be anti-Semitic without hating the Jews, and it's because of that double standard. Like if there's hatred towards the blacks or the Asians or gay people or women, and that is not acceptable, but when there's hatred towards the Jews, even if you don't hate on the Jews, the fact that it's being allowed to happen and is being quote unquote accepted, then that is anti-Semitism. So I think that that's a very important thing that the viewers understand. But let's continue with your story.
Sure. So first of all, I completely agree with what you just said. And I would just make one more point, which is about 100 years ago, the president of Harvard University had official quotas on how many Jews were allowed into the university. He was a Nazi sympathizer. This is President Abbott Lowell. And in fact, there were more Jews at Harvard as a percentage under the quota system than there are today. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today, it's 4% Jewish. And because Jews got dumber over time, it's because there has been a systemic and deliberate campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at the university. So I knew that this was a problem. And in a personal capacity, I would try to speak out in classrooms. I would certainly mention it when friends or family would ask me what it was like being at Harvard. I would say, this is an issue, but I didn't particularly have a platform. I did not have a space whereby individuals or organizations were really listening, and I didn't really have any other options other than to persist, to continue just being a student, wearing my kippah, raising my hand when I felt appropriate to do so, and everything changed. Not after October 7th, but on the night of October 7th. I mean, people often ask me what was anti-Semitism like post-October 7th, and that really does a disservice and almost excuses the inexcusable behavior of our ideological adversaries. So as Jewish students, myself included, are trying to locate their loved ones, I have 4 siblings in Israel. I have grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews. As we're doing that, there were 34 student groups at Harvard University representing more than 1,000 students who see the images of women bleeding from their private areas, who see the images of babies crying as they're being hoarded onto motorcycles taken into Gaza, who see the images of burnt bodies in these destroyed cars. And their immediate and only reaction is to jump out of bed. Some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Their statement literally begins, "We hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence in the Middle East." And to me, what makes this most dangerous and nefarious and scary is I was on a panel about 2 weeks ago with Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece. And she reminded me of this great line from her uncle: "We will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And at Harvard, we would have been lucky to have the silence of our friends. But when you have those in a given society who are at the peak of their intelligence, who are at the climax of their moral and ethical barometers, who are the future leaders of our society, who are the most sophisticated and nuanced and sensitive. When you have those individuals who see the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, who see unvarnished evil and terrorism, and their inclination is to side with that evil and terrorism, then I hope you and your listeners can appreciate this is not just a Jewish problem. It's not just an anti-Semitism problem. This is a problem that strikes at the very core of our liberal democracy, at the very core of our Western civilization, that you have young people who do not stand with the oppressed and the victims of terrorism, but actually stand with the terrorists themselves. That is a tremendous problem. And this unleashed just naked, unvarnished, undeniable, and inescapable anti-Semitism on an almost daily basis at Harvard University.
So you've called the pervasive anti-Semitism on campuses, not just in Harvard, we know that it's everywhere right now. You've called it a national emergency. Explain to me why this should concern everyone.
Well, look, Harvard University purports to train the next generation of American leaders, and by and large, they do. It's not an exaggeration to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with the future United States congressman, a senator, maybe even a president. These are the people at Harvard, at Columbia, at University of Pennsylvania, at MIT, who will be those future policymakers and judges and lawyers and authors and thought leaders that our next generation will be listening to. And if these are the future leaders, then every American, of course, will be directly affected by the laws that they write, by the ideas that they propagate. And whether you care about the existential fight that the state of Israel is undergoing, whether you care about the treatment of American Jews on their respective college campuses, you will care in 10, 20 years when you are being directly impacted by the ideas and the laws and the rulings that these classmates adjudicate. And that's what I keep stressing to Congress. This is what I keep stressing to the national media. This is what I keep stressing to non-Jewish organizations, that these people unfortunately will wield a disproportionate amount of power. And if they are espousing anti-American, anti-Jewish, and anti-Western sentiments now, then we will be the victims of this in about 10 years. And that's incredibly scary.
It is scary. Now, I know that you have a vision of how to handle and ultimately a vision for how to rid campuses of anti-Semitism. I know that you're starting this movement and you're fighting back and you're demanding civil rights with our mutual friend Shai Davidai. And I know that that we're going to talk about that too. But I do want to get back to you, which is back to who you are and why this is so important to you. You've made this your mission. And how old are you again?
25.
Right, you're 25. So, I mean, we've all, as the Jewish people, we've all been thrown into this. But you, if I recall, very shortly after October 7th, you got on a one-way, you bought a one-way ticket to Israel, which is admirable and kind of scary. I live in Israel, but like not everyone did that. So why is this so important? I mean, it's important to a lot of people. I mean, there are people who are not doing anything and they're scared, but what is it about you? Why? Why are you doing all of this? I mean, not the rational reasons. I know the rational reasons. They make sense to me, but what is it that is driving you? Why is this so important to you?
I'm trying to say this without sounding arrogant or braggadocious, but to me, there wasn't really another option. I mean, when Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, the first thing I did was, I mean, you couldn't go to Ukraine because the airport was closed. So I went to Poland and I crossed into the Ukrainian border, and I would bring refugees from Ukraine into Poland. It's not because I really thought about why. It was more of just, this is a crisis. I have the opportunity to help in a limited way, and that's what I'm going to do. And Kal v'chomer, how much more so when it pertains to your own people, when it pertains to a society that you are part of and a country that you lived in and values that you espouse. It was sort of a no-brainer that I had to be involved in some capacity. And so, yeah.
Well, I was on stage with Shai Davidai and someone asked him a question and he said, look, I had no choice. And I actually challenged him on that. And I'm like, fuck off, you do have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You have a choice. And you just said the same thing. It's like, it was kind of like, I just had to. And you didn't have to. So I'm going to push because I want to get to know what's really driving you. Where does that come from? Like, where does that I had to come from? Because you don't have to.
I mean, again, if your immediate family, if your closest friend was in a crisis, was caught up in an existential issue, and you were at a point in your life where you could help, you wouldn't really think too much about it.
Wrong.
And it would not really.
No, because there are a lot of people that I know that didn't do what you did and are not making this their life. And that to me is the interesting thing about you, mate. And that's what I want to get to. I understand everything that you're saying, but I want to go a little deeper. And like, is it something that comes from your family? Is it a sense of justice? Is it like, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing in my fight. And it's not an accident. So I'm very curious as to that part about you, because everyone can find out about what you're doing. And we'll talk about it because it's super important and critical. But to me, where does that come from? That if your friend is in trouble, you will help them, and not just help them, you will drop everything and help them as a human being, as Shabbos Kestenbaum. Have you sat down to think about where that comes from?
If you really want to psychoanalyze, as I said, I grew up in a community whereby from the age of 3, you're in a Jewish day school, you're in a Jewish community, you're at your Jewish synagogue almost every day, and there are values being espoused and there are lessons being taught whereby you are part of a much larger, not just on a cosmic or metaphysical level, but on a very literal sense, you are part of a larger people and a larger story. And to me, it was sort of just natural. It was just second nature. I didn't really think about it. To me, it was just sort of obvious because I was raised in a community whereby this is what you do. And when you have your people, when you have your family who are at an inflection point, you show up and you do something. And I don't think the question is really, why did you do it? I think the question is more, why didn't everyone do it? Because that's what we all should be doing. So again, I was very active in this spiritual activism world. I was protesting and leading rallies for the Uyghurs, an ethnic Muslim minority in China, for Ukrainian refugees, for victims of clergy abuse. And these were things I felt passionate about. I really did. But there's almost a different calling when it comes to Jewish people than when it comes with Uyghurs, because with Jewish people, it's your own people. It's your own family and your own friends. And again, I don't think what I did was particularly noteworthy or mentionable because so many people did it, because that's what we do. There's this great line by Woody Allen, who's a bit of a controversial figure these days, so maybe I shouldn't quote him, but
You
nevertheless.
totally can quote him. Of course, he's
Okay,
amazing.
fine. The line is 95% of life is just showing up. 95% of life is just showing up. Just show up. When I went to Israel after October 7th, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have, well, I had a little connections because it's Israel, but I had no money. I didn't go with any organization. And thank God I fundraised. I was able to deliver supplies to army bases, to dig graves for soldiers who were killed in Gaza, to play guitar for injured civilians in hospitals, to, pick the fruits on the farms. It just showed up. And if I could do it, someone with no connections and no money and no real talent, then everyone else can do it. And they could do it a whole heck of a lot better than I could.
Let me ask you a question on that. This is the kind of stuff that interests me more. I'm secular. I know Shai is atheist. I'm not an atheist. I'm pretty secular though. And you practice. You're more religious. You are religious. Would you say that this is a Jewish value, what you've just described?
Of course. Of course it's a Jewish value. And before I really delve into that answer, I would also just add that one of the dirty secrets at Harvard and across the Ivy Leagues is during the encampments on college campuses, many of the student leaders were Jewish, which was a shame. It's unfortunate. It's sad that we failed as a community, these individuals, so badly. But they will espouse, oh, well, it's a Jewish value to say never again means never again to anybody, and it's a Jewish value of tikkun olam, of repairing the world. The reality is there are 613 commandments. Number one, tikkun olam is not part of it, but number two, there are direct Jewish values that are at play here, that you don't have to get esoteric and generalize by saying, oh, it's a Jewish value to protest genocide, because of course there is no genocide. But there's a Jewish value and a Jewish commandment that don't stand idly by when your brother's blood is being shed. There's a Jewish commandment of v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, to love your brother, love the neighbor as yourself. There's a Jewish commandment to give charity to Jewish and Jewish or Israeli causes. There are so many Jewish commandments at play here, whereby our community is being tested in a way we were never tested before. And a manifestation of my theology, the manifestation and expression of my religious observances, is through the showing up, is through the digging the graves and speaking out. Because I'm not doing it in a vacuum. I'm not doing it for political purposes. I'm doing it because this is what a Jewish person, religious or non, observant or non, should be doing.
So I think that you've managed to answer my question, because I think that's where it comes from with you. You are not doing this for justice or for the political reasons. You're doing this for, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, is because when you say it's what we should do, it's based on a value system of a faith that you belong to and you practice and you believe down to your core. And the interesting thing about being Jewish, I believe, is you can be orthodox, you can be conservative, you can be secular, traditional, you can even be an atheist, like Shai, but you can still adhere and fight for the values of the Jewish people, which is, I think, it's morality. And for some people listening, it might be interesting as they're listening to say, well, what about the morality of what's going on in Israel with the conflict? And you and I know that they're not armed with the facts. And you and I know that there's a lot of brainwashing at play. And you and I know that there's an agenda which is funded and has been funded for 30 years by enemies who want to see this moral code, this moral clarity destroyed, the Western Judeo-Christian values destroyed and replaced with another set of values. But I think that where it comes from with you, and it's very inspirational, by the way, is a deep, deep connection to who it is that you really are, which comes from the home. So thank you for being patient with me and getting there. What's the biggest struggle that the individual Jewish student is facing today on campus? Is it on all campuses, just on some of them? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? I mean, you said that you I know that you have a vision of how to tackle anti-Semitism on campus, but how do we go about that? And what needs to happen for Jewish students, and maybe not only in America, to feel and truly be comfortable on campus again? Like, how do we win this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm glad you said not just in America, because I know you and I have been to Canada. I've been to Concordia, McMaster's, McGill, and been really horrified to see Jewish students show me the pepper spray bottles they carry, show me the classrooms where they were physically assaulted, show me the death threats they get. And that's a damning indictment on the Trudeau government in Canada, but I digress. So not every campus is the same. As someone who's been to dozens of college campuses and has met with hundreds, if not thousands of students at this point, not every campus is the same. And I try not to be a spokesman for people who don't want me to be a spokesman. I try really just to stick to the facts. And I really only speak for myself and for the limited few who've entrusted me with their stories. But I'll give you an example.
Please.
About a month ago, I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and as I'm speaking to the students, they all look at their phones and they look a little concerned. And I asked them, what happened? Is everything okay? And it turns out that the university police had just sent out an alert that there was a physical assault against a Jewish student where the attackers shouted these anti-Semitic epithets. And that was a third physical assault against a Jewish student at the University of Pittsburgh in the last in the last month alone. I mean, that is scary. That is dangerous. I would also add, certainly in the media and within our political environments, people often talk about this as an issue of free speech and where do you draw the line. So much of this issue has literally nothing to do with speech. It has nothing to do with the First Amendment. It has to do with violence. It has to do with destruction of property. It has to do with intimidation and bullying. It has to do with not allowing students access to the libraries and classrooms. So not every campus is the same, but there certainly is this undercurrent that is pervasive, I would argue, at the overwhelming majority of college campuses, where Israel is singled out and held to a double standard, where Jewish students are forced to respond to the actions and policies of the Israeli government, and where a significant amount of Jewish students, and the data supports this. If you look at statistics from the Anti-Defamation League or the American Jewish Committee, they report more often than not that Jewish students are reluctant to share their religious identity or their political expressions because they are concerned about the professional blowback, they're concerned about the social isolation, and they're concerned for their own safety. And that is a damning indictment on the state of higher education in the United States, is damning indictment on our White House administration. And the way we fight back, I would argue, yes, we should file lawsuits, which I, of course, did. Yes, we should speak to the media, which, again, I do. But ultimately, to get to the root of the issue, I think we need education more than anything else. It's good that the ADL and the AJC are ramping up their donations. I think they're good organizations that do good things. But ultimately, in the United States, we have a tuition affordability crisis. There are Jewish families today in the United States and across North America who can't afford to send their kids to a Jewish day school. So they opt to send them to a public school where they receive no Jewish education, where they do not learn about their Jewish identity, about Jewish values, about the state of Israel. And I think the best way to confront the plague and the virus of anti-Semitism is having loud, proud, and confident and educated Jewish people who, when they go to their college campuses, when they work in a professional setting, they're armed with the facts. And more important than the facts, they're confident in their identity. Because Jewish people were not brought here to just combat anti-Semitism. We were brought here to be a light unto the nations, to spread godliness and goodness. And one of the manifestations of doing that is combating anti-Semitism. It's necessary 100%, but it's not the goal. The goal is to be that light, to express our Jewish values, because the world needs it. The world needs us. And we need to have passionate, educated, knowledgeable, wise Jewish people as young and as early as possible. So I think if we were to really refocus our priorities in the Jewish community on that education, on making sure that there's no Jewish person in the United States, in Canada, in the world today, who does not go to a Jewish school, who does not go to Israel for a certain period of time because of issues of cost. So if we can do that, we can totally transform the reality and the state of the Jewish people in 10, 20 years to come. I really believe that in my heart of hearts. It's education that is the most critical.
Well, you know what I'm doing I mean, I think you know what I'm trying to do with I'm That Jew, which is, a lot of Jewish people are like, don't speak to the echo chamber. And I'm like, no, speak to the echo chamber. We need to build ourselves. We need to lean into ourselves, and we need to remember who it is that we are. I did the branding for the Jewish Agency for Israel, and when I worked with Sharansky, and he was a hero of mine. The reason for the rebrand quite a few years ago was literally because there was a glaring gap between Jewish people and the organizations that were trying to get funding, to be able to operate and serve the Jewish people, because people didn't care enough. They were seeing that people were giving to other causes, and this cultural assimilation was the reason. And when you say assimilation of the Jewish people to the Jewish people, typically they think, okay, well, Jewish people are marrying out. That's kind of like what your head goes there. But cultural assimilation is also exactly what you said. It's when you stop educating, you stop investing in who it is that you are as a people. Now, I know that Jewish people assimilate. We assimilate, and we have for thousands of years. We're part of the societies that we live in. But we must never forget who we are. And I agree with you 1,000 billion gazillion % that is where the fight is. It won't happen overnight. It's going to take time. But we as a community have not invested enough in educating ourselves about who we are. Now, there's one thing that you said which I want to speak about, and it's more to the non-Jewish audience. And I want you to talk about it, because when we say a light into the nations, the chosen people, our values, the world needs us, it comes across as arrogant. It really does. And I know that we don't mean it that way. And I'm wondering if you can explain to those non-Jewish people who are listening that when you say such things, that it's not coming from a place of higher than thou. I think that's really important, because if people don't understand what that actually means, it can be a real turnoff. And so I'm not saying that that's where you're coming from. I'm asking you to explain that in a way that people who are non-Jewish will understand what it is that you really mean, because I think that's really important.
Sure. I mean, I would say, not in religious terms, but just really sociological terms, the Jewish people have a mandate to be a light onto the nations, in the same way that any people, any ethnicity, any racial group, any political identity have an obligation to spread their talents and values and wisdom as a net positive for the world. So there is something to be said that you have a people who are 0.2% of the world's population, but nevertheless are 25% of all Nobel Prize recipients. There's something to be said about a people who 3 years after being incinerated in gas chambers and crematoria were able to build a state of their own. There is something to be said of a people that have lasted and withstood the test of time, who, after facing persecution, oppression, and discrimination by the Greeks and the Babylonians and the Romans and the communists and the Nazis and on and on and on, nevertheless are still here and keep their religious traditions and keep their rituals and practices, keep their ideological beliefs after 3,000 years. There is something to be said that those people have what to contribute to the world. And that does not exist in a vacuum. It does not mean that it is exclusively and only Jews who have that obligation. Anyone who has talents and values and cultures and practices that, as I said, would benefit society, those individuals or those groups or peoples have an obligation to spread it as well. And that's sort of the message that ironically, it's Judaism that teaches in a very particular way, a very universal idea, which is, regardless of your faith, be part of the solution. Consider yourself as part of this brotherhood of mankind. And I had an interview with Glenn Greenwald about 2 weeks ago. Glenn Greenwald is certainly not a friend of the Jewish state, to put it mildly. And he kept challenging me. How can there be anti-Semitism when Jews are titans of industry? How can there be anti-Semitism when Jews are university presidents? Aren't you just exaggerating this? And I said, you're using our talent, you're using our success almost against us. But I'm very proud of what the Jewish people have been able to do for the betterment of humanity. And I think all peoples would be better served if they sort of took a page out of our playbook and said, what is it about such a tiny minority, about such a small group of people that have had such an outsized impact on the world? And they should look at our success. They should look at our devotion to education, commitment to family, insistence on universal ideas and values, and perhaps apply that in their own lives as well. Again, not because they can't do those things, but they can and should do it as well, and perhaps use Judaism as a blueprint or as a roadmap to do that. So it's not Jewish particularity at the expense of anyone else. It's Jewish particularity in the encouragement of other people.
I think that's a great answer. Also, what you said was Judaism. And another thing that's also often not understood by people who are not Jewish is that you say Christianity, it's a religion. You say Hindu or Sikh, it's a religion. You say Jewish, then of course there's religion. Of course there's Torah. Of course there's God. But it's not just that. It's a lot of other things. It's a way of life. It's a value system. It's a heritage. It's not just religion. And so when you say Judaism, I just always find it interesting that people see that as, well, that's religion. That's practice. You have to be religious to be Jewish. And you can be Jewish, which I think is very unique to us. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Look, Judaism was the first monotheistic religion. Judaism advanced relatively progressive ideals for its time, like the protection and the emancipation of women. We do that through the ketubah, sort of the marriage contract that legally protects the bride from any misfortune. We are an institution or a religion that advances in a relatively radical way for the socioeconomically disadvantaged. The fact that a farmer would have to leave a certain portion of his field specifically for the poor to come and eat, that if he were to drop anything, that he would simply leave it there for those who needed it. I mean, if you look throughout the Hebrew Bible, and again, when I'm not suing Harvard, I study religion. That's what I was there to do. That's my passion. That's what really animates and excites me. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do that very often, but I always saw Judaism not just as a religion and something that you practice in the study halls or in the synagogue, but something that mandates and influences your involvement with the world. I actually think I said this on Shai Davidai's podcast, but what's so great about Judaism is that the conversation with the Almighty is not relegated or limited to certain spaces, but it's a conversation that happens anywhere, anytime, at any place. And to me, that's such a liberating and remarkable idea that you as an individual, as a 25-year-old college kid, you have this connection, this attachment to the divine at any point in your life. We just celebrated the holiday of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And it is a day that is mandated in the Hebrew Bible, where God himself says, I am putting together this day for you, so you can come and you can conceive of yourself as part of this people. I mean, what a remarkable conception of our relationship with God, and how empowering. Regardless of your age and your talents and your profession, you have a significant role to play, not just in our faith, but in the world at large.
I'm going to switch for a second because I want to talk about politics. I've been asked by a lot of, I'm not American, I'm Israeli. No one really knows who I would vote for. I don't usually talk politics. But a lot of people have been asking me about the situation in America. And a lot of Jewish Democrats are saying, I can't vote for Kamala Harris because I don't believe in the Democratic Party right now, in the Democrats. But I can't bring myself to vote for Trump because of who Trump is, because he's a bit of an ass. That's more or less the comments that I'm getting. Now, you're a lifelong Democrat. You're a former Bernie Sanders supporter. but you've famously or maybe notoriously said that Democrats won't do enough to protect Jewish students and that the party abandoned you. And you've announced that you're voting for Trump. I'd love to understand why and how you came to that decision and why you think that's a better choice, a smarter choice, a safer choice as a Jewish person and for the Jewish people.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is I'll plug my Instagram. Your listeners should go on my
Please.
Instagram. I posted a video of my speech at the Republican Jewish Coalition, where I endorse Trump. It's about a 10-minute speech. I encourage them all to watch the speech in full because it'll probably do a better job of articulating than I'm doing now. Essentially, the story goes like this. As you said, lifelong Democrat. I actually registered to vote as a Democrat the day I turned 18. I've only voted for Democrats. I worked for Democrats in Congress. Kamala Harris is an existential threat to the Jewish people, to the survival of the state of Israel. This is a woman who told Israel not to go into Rafah because there would be no way to safely evacuate the civilians in Gaza. Israel was able to safely evacuate every single civilian in Gaza within a week. Israel, because of their operation in Rafah, were able to rescue hostages. Israel, because of their operation in Rafah, were able to dismantle some of the last units of Hamas in the area. Kamala Harris is an individual who has not met with a single Jewish student since October 7th. Kamala Harris is an individual who has openly toyed with the idea of an arms embargo against the state of Israel. And in fact, just yesterday, it's been released that the White House has been pressuring Israel that if they do not supply Hamas with aid, because all the aid is stolen by Hamas, they don't supply them with aid within 30 days, they would impose an arms embargo. This would be the first time a defending nation would be obligated to provide aid to their enemy. This has never happened in the history of modern warfare before. She's not a friend of American Jews. She's certainly not a friend to the state of Israel. On a more deeper level, I am someone who has testified in front of the United States Congress a significant amount of times. And when I testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee, for example, the ranking Democratic member, Jerry Nadler, fell asleep. When I testified in front of the House Education Committee, the ranking Democratic member, Bobby Scott, criticized us for focusing exclusively on anti-Semitism. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, who's, of course, a Democrat and a Jew, because of him, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, the Countering Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, the Deterrent Act, which are all things that would alleviate the concerns of Jewish students on college campuses, that would bolster protections for Jewish students, that would regulate outside foreign funding to our universities, that would mandate the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition in investigating anti-Semitism. Because of him and the Senate Democrats, none of those bills have come to a floor vote in the Senate. The Senate Judiciary Committee has not held a single hearing on anti-Semitism, except when they were finally forced to do one about a month ago, and they did it on anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred. So all lives mattered, the Jewish people. Yep. And I didn't want to say these things for basically 12 months. I wanted to appear either bipartisan or nonpartisan. But there's a limited amount of good faith that I can give the Democratic Party when they are so clearly not interested in our issue. The White House refused to grant us a roundtable opportunity to discuss anti-Semitism. As I said, Kamala Harris has not met with a single Jewish student since October 7th. And for me, the final straw was I was at the Democratic National Convention. I was there. And I said, look, you don't want me speaking because you think I'm a MAGA fascist who spoke at the RNC? Fine, I get it. Have a Jewish student speak. There's no reason why the Republicans can do it, but you guys can't. And I gave them a list of competent, articulate Jewish students who are proud progressives and would be happy to speak. And they ignored me every single time. So I just can't vote for a party that has isolated, alienated, and ignored Jewish students every single time. And do I agree with Trump on most of his policy prescriptions? No. I've been very clear that I don't. I think he's wrong. I'm very proud and open about it. I think he's wrong on many, many issues. But when it comes to our most immediate needs, when it comes to the 7 American hostages, when it comes to protecting Jewish students and combating anti-Semitism, when it comes to the state of Israel, I think it is so obvious that he would be better for our interests. I'm a surrogate for the Trump campaign, and I encourage each and every American Jew. I get you don't like him. I get we don't like the tweets. I get we don't like his sense of morality and right and wrong. I get it because I agree with you. But electoral politics in the United States are binary choices. One party wins, one party loses. There's no parliamentary system. There's no coalition. It's one or the other. And if you objectively assess the two candidates as it pertains to our interests as the American Jewish community, Trump would be so far and beyond what Kamala Harris could possibly deliver for us. So in the same way, I think the African American community should vote for their best interests. I think the Jewish American community, for the first time, should be a little selfish and vote for our best interests and vote for Donald Trump this November.
So I want to ask you two questions about that. The first question is, what is it about the Democrats? Why is that the stance, for lack of a better word, of the Democrats right now? Like, what is driving this? And the second question is, when it comes to voting and the Jewish people voting selfishly, we talked about at the beginning that the Jewish people and their set of values represent more than just the Jewish people. So I'd like to take it outside of the Jewish people for a second and who the Jewish people should vote for, in your opinion. And I want you to talk about the larger population, why it's so important for them. I want to bring it back to what's good for the Jews ultimately is good for, when I say humanity, I mean the goodness of humanity, which might sound a little arrogant, but I think that we have a track record going back thousands of years of trying to make the world a better place. So the first question again, why are the Democrats acting that way? And two, what would you say about non-Jewish voters voting for Trump or Kamala?
Sure. So I think the Democrats are acting this way because we're in an election year. Israel is a divisive issue. And in order for Kamala Harris to have an electoral victory, she needs the state of Michigan. State of Michigan has a very, very high percentage of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic constituents, most notably in Dearborn, Michigan, where they have chanted "Death to America," where they held public funeral proceedings for Hasrallah and Ismail Haniya, where they, on October 8th, displayed pictures of Yahweh Sinwar and were celebrating.
Well, let's be more specific, because it's not just the residents of Dearborn, Michigan. Let's be specific about who these people are, what the demographic is. Are they Muslim? Are they Arab? Are they Christian? Are they Buddhist?
Well, I want to say this without getting in trouble. It's predominantly Arab Americans. It's not all Arab Americans, but there's a significant problem within the Arab American community where these anti-West and anti-Semitic ideals are normalized. The fact that you can have in the United States of America some Arab Americans or just Americans who are chanting for the death of their own country. I mean, we see those things in Europe. We certainly see those things in the Middle East, but to see that in the United States, it's just unheard of. It's unfathomable that this could be happening. And Kamala Harris needs them to win. She needs the state of Michigan to win. And she cannot be seen, the Democratic Party cannot be seen as favoring one group over the other, which is why, yes, it's true, at the Democratic Convention, Rachel and John Goldberg-Polin, the parents of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, yes, it's true they were given a speaking slot. But you know who spoke right before them? Keith Ellison, the anti-Semitic Attorney General of Minnesota, to again placate to the mob, saying, yeah, we're fine with the Jews, but don't worry, we're also fine with you guys. There's a lack of moral conviction. There's a lack of political seriousness. And I think that's what underscores the Democratic Party's reluctance to meet with Jewish students and to talk about this issue, because they can't be seen as favoring one group over the other. In terms of why the American people should support Trump, number one, I think the issues I outlined are not just Jewish issues. They are American issues. There are 7 American hostages being held in Gaza. And Kamala Harris's response since November is we need a ceasefire to bring the hostages home. Forget about the fact that a ceasefire would leave Hamas in power. Yahweh Sinwar and Hamas have rejected every single ceasefire since November. In fact, John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, he said just yesterday, there isn't even a ceasefire on the table because Yahweh Sinwar's not interested in one. So how can you have a person who's who's running to be president of the United States saying, well, we need a ceasefire, and not acknowledging that there is no ceasefire. There's no deal to be had. You are not going to release the hostages through one because Hamas isn't interested in one. So you can't simply state the exact same answer over and over again when it does not purport to reflect reality. Israel is the most critical Western ally to the United States. Forget about the intelligence that it shares to the United States as it pertains to the Middle East, which is crucial. Forget about the fact that it is a deterrent to Iran and its proxies. But it is a country that shares all of our same values of democracy, of women's emancipation, of LGBTQ plus rights. That's not just a Jewish issue. That's an issue for the American people. And one of the criticisms I get very often, I think it's a silly criticism, but I get it from Israelis, I get it from Jews quite often, is they'll leave me angry voicemails and they'll say, you only care about the American hostages. You only talk about the 7. You don't care about the other hostages. And of course I care about all the hostages. We want them all home. But the reality is you are not going to convince the American people to care about people whose names they can't even pronounce. You have to make this a local issue. This affects those in Missouri in the same way it affects the Jews in New York. It's an American issue. We cannot accept and normalize the taking of American civilians because of geopolitics in the Middle East. So I think the issues I outlined are not just particular to the Jewish community, but I really think they do apply to the American people.
That's a great answer. I have 3 more questions. One is related to what we just talked about. And that question is, we talked about why the Democrats, in your opinion, are bombing right now or are sucking right now for, I guess bombing isn't the right word, but they're not doing a good job right now. We talked about that. But what we didn't talk about is why Trump, why the Republicans. And I think some facts are in order. You know, you said very clearly that you don't agree with everything. In fact, you disagree with a lot of Trump. But right now, for lack of a better word, maybe this is existential. This is that critical. But why will it be different with Trump and the Republicans, in your opinion?
Sure. I think the answer is pretty obvious, which is that the Republicans have a track record. I mean, again, I don't like Donald Trump's policies on most issues, but this is a guy who moved the embassy to Jerusalem. This is a guy who recognized the Golan Heights as sovereign to Israel. This is a guy who achieved relative regional stability in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords. You now have peace with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, with Sudan. This is a guy who put one of the most toughest sanctions on Iran, nearly bankrupting their economy. This is a guy who signed the most comprehensive protections for Jewish students on college campuses with his 2019 executive order on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, without which I would not have a lawsuit against Harvard. This is a guy who regularly consulted with the Jewish community and Jewish leadership on what our issues are and were. So I don't think you really have to speculate because he did it. And he has promised very clearly that if universities violate the civil rights of Jewish students, we're going to withhold their federal funding. If they're under the jurisdiction of the Department of Education, we're not going to accredit them. If there are students on a foreign visa who violate American law, we're going to deport them, which is, by the way, that's been American law for 50 years. It's just never enforced. If the Democratic Party of Kamala Harris were to adopt the exact same policies, which really are not politically controversial or partisan issues, they were to do that, then I would gladly support and endorse them too. But the reality is they haven't and they won't.
Thanks. Here's the other 2 questions. And then I guess we'll wrap up. I mean, I could talk to you, I could keep talking to you, and I think that we will continue. But for now, 2 questions. So you're interviewed all the time, and you're very passionate. You're very well spoken and articulate, and you make a lot of sense. In all these interviews, is there a question that you wish that you were asked but you haven't been yet? And if so, what would that be? What's one thing that you'd like to be asked that you haven't been able to talk about?
Well, I would say that question is something I'd never been asked before. So that's good. I'd have to think about that. I don't know what the question would be, but something I wish I'd be able to talk about more often, but it's not really relevant, is the crises of faith that Jewish students are experiencing in conjunction with the crisis of antisemitism. Because I think people sort of forget that, yes, many Jewish students rose to the occasion and began to battle relatively quickly right after October 7th. But we had all these questions of what the hell is happening. You have the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust on one of the most joyous Jewish holidays there is. You have the raping of Jewish women. And this presented profound theological problems to young, impressionable people like myself. And because we've been so adamant and busy with the politics and the media and the anti-Semitism aspect, I don't think we really had time to properly reflect, digest, question what really happened on October 7th. And, it doesn't even have to be a religious issue. It could also be an issue of mental health and one's emotions. I don't think many of us really processed it because we were so quickly thrown into this position. So I don't know what the question would be, but something I would be comfortable talking about more has sort of been mental health challenges, have been crises of faith as a response to October 7th.
I think one of the reasons that we're not able to really get there is because we're still fighting. I mean, something that a lot of viewers who are not Jewish might not know is something that we, the Jewish people, are saying a lot is it's still October 7th. Every day is October 7th until we get our hostages back, until we are able to quash this intense Jewish hatred and the anti-Semitism of the silent majority that accepts the double standard. Unbeknownstly, I mean, in many ways, they're just simply not aware. So we're living that until, and it's traumatic. I mean, what we are going through is traumatic. Now, that's not to say that what your innocent Gazans are going through, and I choose the word carefully, innocent, because there are a lot of regular Gazans who are really not innocent. They're complicit. But there are many Gazans who are innocent too, and it's not a competition. But as we are going through this trauma, it's very difficult on this ongoing trauma to start the healing process. So I think that's one of the reasons. But no, thank you for answering that. And this is the last question, which I usually ask first. But sometimes I forget. But I'm going to ask you, and take your time with it. But I'd like you to complete this sentence, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with Judaism or anything that we've been talking about today. But just try and complete the sentence for me. It's this. Shabbos Kestenbaum, please complete this sentence. I'm that.
Well, it's not a very original or creative answer, but I'm that passionate Jew. I'm that young Jew. I'm that inspired to be Jew, which I know is not very creative or original, but that's how I feel.
Well, first of all, it doesn't need to be creative or original. It just needs to be how you feel. And you can feel that coming through, bro. Really. I commend you. I respect you. I admire you. It's difficult as I'm talking to you to remember that you're just 25 years old. You're wise beyond your years. And I'm here for you with whatever you need. And just thank you for taking the time to be on this show. If there's one last thing, and this will be in the caption, but maybe you can quickly say where people can follow you again just before we say goodbye.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, not just for this interview, but everything you've been doing to highlight really remarkable people in our community. People could follow me on Instagram, Shabbos Kest, and on Twitter, Shabbos K, so a little shorter. And I think I'm very funny on social media, but no one really seems to agree. But I certainly post a lot about Harvard University and the anti-Semitism there. So that's my niche. But would love to connect on social media. And really thank you, Eitan, for this initiative and this project that has really been a breath of fresh air and has been so important for our community to highlight the individuals, not me, but the individuals who are really making an impact. So thank you.
You're going to be highlighted, and there's more that we can do together, and we will talk about that, you and I, offline. But thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for what you do. Shabbos, I really appreciate it. Well, that's it. Thank you for joining me on I'm That. I hope you enjoyed the chat, and I hope you'll join me for our next guest. In the meantime, definitely hit subscribe, whether you're on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, or any other platform. And if you can, leave a comment, give it a like, and tell your friends. That would be brilliant. Stay tuned for the next show, and see you soon.